далекие-далекие времена жадные дворяне наживались на неграмотном народе. Хорошо, что у них был знакомый в Шервуде.
И сейчас, спустя века, узнать, как пополнять свои кошельки, а не чужие, помогает Sherwood.biz. Он может превратить тунеядца во фрилансера, любителя в настоящего профи. Помочь безыдейному стать гением. Хочешь привлечь клиентов в свое дело, научиться программированию или анимации, а может выучить чужеземные языки? Получить знания, чтобы заработать, тебе поможет Sherwood.biz. Заходи, узнавай, учись.
И позвольте мне сказать вам кое-что еще. Нет стремления более естественного, чем стремление к знанию.
We are going to cover so much material in this course that we simply can't go through it all in any reasonable way. But I do want to give you a sampling, a couple of the highlights that stand out to me. We're going to cover the three major frameworks as we see them: Django, Flask, and Pyramid. And we're going to do a lot with each one of these frameworks. Tons of different things we're going to add, and use cases and scenarios we're going to put them through. We're also going to cover some of the foundations of the web, like HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. So maybe you know HTML, maybe you're not super good at it, maybe you have always kind of avoided CSS. We're going to spend a certain amount of time really digging into that so you know it really, really well as we go through this course. We'll do a quick primer on JavaScript. If you haven't used that language for a while or it's totally new to you, no worries, we got you covered there. We're also going to cover some of the single page application frameworks for JavaScript, like React and Vue.js. We're going to talk about how to write data and query data from SQLite. This is an embedded database that comes with Python, and it's super simple to use, but it's a good stand-in for your favorite database, be that Postgres, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, whatever. When we talk to databases, we can do direct queries against it, but most of the time we're going to use some kind of ORM. We're going to use SQL Alchemy a lot. We're also going to use the Django ORM during the Django sections. We're going to see how to create REST APIs in a whole bunch of different frameworks. So you're going to do all sorts of cool stuff with things like API Star, Responder, using Pyramid and Flask, and just tons and tons of different APIs we're going to build. And we're going to call those services, sometimes testing it with Postman, sometimes calling it from JavaScript, or even directly from within our Python code with something like requests. We're going to write async code. The web server and web applications are ideal candidates for using Python's async and await keywords. The reason is most of the time web apps are waiting on something else, on the network, on external APIs, on databases, and so on. So they could go do productive work while they're waiting on these other systems. And we're going to talk about a couple of frameworks and async and await itself to make this super easy and super powerful in Python. We're going to talk about web scraping. Sometimes it's great to call an API, but if the API doesn't exist and the data's on the web, guess what? You can use Python and get at that data anyway. So we're going to talk about web scraping and how to get data off of websites that don't have an API, or maybe we don't know about their API. Of course, once we write all our web apps, we don't want to ship a busted version to production and take the website offline. We want to make sure it works and it continues to work automatically. So we're going to write unit tests against our web application, mocking out the database and API calls and all sorts of cool stuff like that. We're going to take our application and deploy them to Linux using MicroWhiz and Nginx, and we're also going to deploy them to Heroku. So you'll see a couple of deployment scenarios, which are pretty awesome, and you'll learn the basics of operating Python web applications in production on Linux. We're also going to talk about Docker. Containers are super important these days. There's a lot of use cases for them. And we're going to follow on our Linux deployment stuff with Docker, because Docker is really a special way to create very small, lightweight, customized Linux deployment, right? So everything you learn about deploying to Linux is going to be super useful for when we get to Docker. You'll just have to use the Docker commands rather than, say, the shell commands directly. We'll see how to do containers and even orchestrate multi-container systems with Docker Compose. This is just a tiny sampling of what we're going to cover. We're going to go through so many amazing topics and little libraries and different things that you can do on the web with Python. You're going to have a hard time choosing what to use at the end of this course, I'm sure.